Hello and welcome to the first video in a series on middle pair. My name is Ben Hales and this is brought to you by Postfloppoker.com. So in these videos there's going to be five short ones, they won't be too long. Brief introduction, which is this. Then I'm going to talk about equity and board texture in the second video. So when you flop middle pair, how much equity do you have? Usually that's going to be between 40 and 60% equity, tending to be over 50%. But occasionally you'll flop middle pair and your equity still sucks. So it's an important consideration, and it's really important that we're thinking about our hand's equity against our opponent's range. We'll also do some range against range thinking. And we'll talk about board texture briefly, and that of course affects our equity. In the third video, I'm going to do what I did in my book, Postflop, which is to break down postflop situations into 6. There are 6 postflop situations, and I'm going to basically look at middle pair played in each of these situations and what kind of betting lines should we be taking in those 6 situations. Really useful way of breaking down post-flop analysis. If you're familiar with my work, you'll know it's something I like to do. If you're not familiar, then well, here's a start. You may not know about my post-flop scenarios. There's a video on YouTube which you can see, which will explain it. Fourth video is going to be about stack to pot ratio and how that affects you when you're playing middle pair, because it's really important. If you've got a really low stack to pot ratio, you're not folding your middle pair. If you're not going to fold your middle pair, it opens up so many more betting opportunities and ways of being aggressive. Whereas when the SPR is much higher, the risk reward ratio is not stacking up for you. Middle pair becomes much more of a liability to build a pot with. So the whole betting line needs to be rethought out. And so I think the fourth video is very important for making sure you understand that short stack situations is very different to when you're deeper stacked. And the final video will be a collection of 5 or 6 examples of putting into practice some of the things that we've learned over the first few videos. Okay, let's talk generally about middle pair for a second. Middle pair is what? It is a marginal hand. Marginal hand's not a great hand, it's not a terrible hand, it's something in the middle, right? So when we flop middle pair, how do we feel? We feel, well, yeah, I'm pretty pleased. It's better than average, yeah. Is it profitable? Yes. So we're generally pretty happy to have flopped middle pair, but we're not over the moon. It's profitable, but not in large pots. So as I was saying with the stack to pot ratio before, what we're really looking to do with middle pair is to get through the hand without building too much of a huge pot. There are times when you're going to want to take a line which involves double barreling, but there are also times when some pot control is going to be smart. So middle pair is not a hand you want to go throwing chips in relentlessly into the middle, because it just doesn't do as well in the large pots for obvious reasons. Middle pair improves 20% of the time. How do we know that? Well, there's clearly 5 outs when you've got middle pair. All right, so 2 to make trips, 3 to make 2 pair. This gives us 5 outs. 4 and 2 rule. 10% to hit the turn, 20% to hit turn and river or river. That's when there's no draw. Of course, it could be better than 20%, but 20% is not bad. You may be ahead already, plus you're going to improve 20% of the time, plus you may make them fold. So you've got a whole load of ways of winning the hand, and understanding that it's going to improve 20% of the time is really important. Middle pair is weaker in multi-way pots. Most hands are weaker in multi-way pots. It's just because there's a higher percentage chance that one of your opponents is going to hold something strong or have a strong draw, and he's going to be able to knock you off the hand. So middle pair just doesn't do as well in multi-way pots. It's not a good thing for it. I mentioned before in when we were talking about not building large pots that you may want to be checking here and there. So instead of double barreling the turn, sometimes utilizing a check or just calling your opponent's bet instead of raising is a useful way of exercising pot control, keeping the pot smaller. It just limits the damage, and it deals with the second point here that actually middle pair is really good. It makes money, but if the pot gets too big, it will tend not to make money. And the final point on this slide is just to make sure that when you're faced by an aggressive move, maybe a check raise, maybe a great big raise all in, your decision is usually going to be to fold. Middle pair is just not strong enough to start throwing lots and lots of chips into the middle. And also, once your opponent's range narrows so significantly when they show aggression, there's normally, it doesn't make sense to continue. And actually, normally most players do fold to aggression with middle pair. It's a lot easier to do it with middle pair than with top pair. Top pair tends to be the one people get a bit unstuck with against aggression. But middle pair is still, it's tempting sometimes to keep calling, and then you start bleeding money. So if that's a problem for you, then let it be perfectly clear. Really, when you've got middle pair and you've got somebody else raising at you, most of the time you should be choosing to fold. Okay, and the final slide. So middle pair is normally good enough to commit to when the SPR is less than 4, or at least when it's very small. So if the SPR is like 2, which means there's 1,000 in the middle, there's 2,000 left in the effective stack, that's when the SPR is 2, right? That's the spot really where you can't fold a hand as strong as middle pair. It doesn't matter how narrow your opponent's range is at this point. You've reached a point of no return. You have enough equity in this pot to justify putting the rest in. Therefore, usually going ahead and getting it in is the right play. If the SPR is a bit more, so 3 or 4, there may be times when you narrow your opponent's range so far that you're scared by how much equity you believe you have, and you don't think that you're going to continue, and you make a fold. Well, they should be the exception rather than the rule. They do exist, but in general, SPR less than 4, middle pair, you're going to be going to it to showdown if forced, and you should be being prepared to go to showdown if forced. Otherwise, if you're folding too much, you are losing profit. Be careful in the yellow zone when the SPR is 4 to 6. This is that bit that's so hard to play. I find it hard. I know a lot of really good players find it hard to play this type of situation, a marginal hand with SPRs 4 to 6. Not easy. You don't want to take aggressive betting lines because it can get you committed all in with such a marginal hand. So sometimes the defense here is just to choose slightly weaker, more defensive betting line, just for pot control. Keep it under control. Try and avoid making big mistakes yourself, putting your opponent perhaps in with a few more weaker hands in the pot, and maybe making him make a mistake. That's my thinking. And whenever I'm a bit deeper stacked, I'll tend to play middle pair, just with a bit more caution. That's not to say you should never double barrel. Of course, you should. But there are also spots where you will need to slow down. So that's the yellow zone. Not my favourite place. Short-handed, you should tend to favour gambling. So if you're playing in a end of a tournament, or your heads up, or you're playing some heads up cash, or even cash games with like 3, 4, 5, or even 6 players, you're getting more. The ranges are just wider, right? So if the ranges are wider, your equity with middle pair is higher. So when you flop middle pair, you're going to tend to do well. So you should tend to favour gambling. Fairly logical. If you suspect your opponent's drawing, turn card's a good place to get busy. Yeah, this is just a general point, really. Doesn't necessarily apply to only middle pair. Lots of drawing hands in your opponent's range. Then don't be afraid of putting him under pressure by betting, or even by raising if he bets into you. It could be the best place for you to get your chips in. So don't ignore what your opponent's up to, and if you think that there's too many hands that he's drawing with, it could be a bag load, that's the time to attack and not defend. In general, the check raise is still an aggressive move in poker. There are more and more people using it as a semi-bluff and even as a bluff. So again, know your opponent, but without any information about your opponent, middle pair's just not a good enough hand to start battling check raises. Just fold. That's my advice. It's just not worth it. It's not worth it. You're going to be fighting a losing battle if you start taking other actions. Position is really important when you're playing a cash game or you're in a deep stack tournament. We know that. Why is position more important in deep stack spots? Well, you tend to see flop, turn and river more often. Actually, in shorter stack situations, the advantages of which position you're sat in does kind of get a bit muddled up sometimes. I mean, there are techniques like the stop and go, where players will be really short stacked and just call a raise and then shove on any flop. Actually, they're using the fact that they go first after the flop to their advantage. So position in small SPR spots, you may only get to benefit from on the flop, but you never see the turn or river. Whereas position in higher SPR spots, you're going to get more and more benefit from. Now, I told you a lie before. I told you that this was the last slide. There's one more. There's one more. It's a bonus slide. It's pretty boring, but I wanted to keep your attention. What are we trying to achieve? All right, middle pair videos. We're trying to improve your decision-making process, right? And we're trying to maximize our profit, maximize our big blinds per 100 when we play middle pair. We want to make as much money as possible. To do that, it would be useful to learn some solid betting lines in the different situations we're going to find ourselves with middle pair. So by the end of these 5 videos, I hope that I'm going to have achieved these 3 goals. My name's Ben Hales. Thank you for listening.